Hello, welcome to WeatherWise. I'm meteorologist Nathan Scott. We've been discussing what happens with the El Nino situation across the globe. We're going to go more in depth with that, especially here when it comes to severe weather potential in Arkansas, snow potential, and also Arctic air. Let's go over the recap of a La Nina situation, though, because right now, this graphic shows the El Nino situation. And what we're watching are the trade winds coming from the east and blowing off towards the west. When the trade winds get stronger than average, the warm water that was situated off the South America coastline will be pushed over to Asia and also Indonesia. With that situation continuing to develop, eventually that warm water continues to make its way off to the west and retreat this part of the world. Meanwhile, there will be deeper, colder water that will be making its way to the surface. That's known as upwelling. This is a great situation for fishermen along the coast of Peru and Ecuador because that upwelling effect brings in a lot of nutrients and the fishing situation gets much more improved. So there's the colder water developing, and that upwelling continues to make its way into that part of the world, and that will bring down your average sea surface temperatures. Once we reach a critical point, we switch from a neutral year to a La Nina situation. And this will have a major impact on what happens across the globe. It's just one aspect here in North America, but usually when you have a La Nina situation, you're going to have the polar jet stream that's going to take some dives down to the south. That allows for Arctic outbreaks across the northern tier of the country as the polar vortex does make visitations to the Great Lakes and even the Ohio Valley. However, the moisture train, or the southern part of the jet stream, is not going to be as active compared to an El Nino situation, so a lot of your moisture will be affecting the Pacific Northwest and not so much California. Then also make its way into the Ohio Valley. So this is from the Climate Prediction Center on a basic overview on what the effects of La Nina will do across the lower 48. It's more of a snow situation, above average snowfall expected for the northern Rockies, the upper plains, and also in the parts of Canada. Wetter situation across the Ohio Valley. Now that could be rain or it could also be snow, and then drier conditions with drought to develop likely across Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and even down into the deep south. For us here in Arkansas, what are the impacts? Once again, we'll go over the chances of an Arctic outbreak, how much snow, and also severe weather potential. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about how they come to the resolution on whether this is a La Nina, El Nino, or neutral situation. Here's a recap. We look at the Oceanic Nino Index. So we're looking at a chunk of the Pacific Ocean and how those sea surface temperatures are over a 3-month period. So it's a primary indicator of a climate pattern, tracks the running 3-month average sea surface temperatures in the east central tropical Pacific Ocean from the international dateline to near Peru. El Nino is declared when that sea surface temperature is 0.5 degrees Celsius or higher, and a La Nina is present when a certain part of that region, known as the Nino 3.4 region, is lower than average by 0.5 degrees or lower than that. And we are going into a situation that we do have numbers that are cooler than average. When we break down the ocean data, we don't have a lot of it. We only have 75 years of ocean data, so this is kind of a small sample size that we're working with. And you break down each period according to what it was. It's 25 years of La Nina, 23 years where the ENSO was neutral, and we've had 27 years where the ENSO was an El Nino situation. Go over to Storm Track 11 now, Perry, please, because like I said, we are in a La Nina situation, and this is the latest report from NOAA, the Climate Prediction Center Department in particularly. La Nina is favored to continue in the Northern Hemisphere winter with the transition to a ENSO neutral, most likely in January through March of 2026. They're giving it a 61% chance that this will continue. I'm not going to read you this whole thing, but here's the situation right now when they put this out, and you can clearly see the temperatures are below average right through the equatorial Pacific, and it's about 1 to 2 degrees below average, it looks like, maybe even close to 3. So we do have below average temperatures, and the 3.4 region is right about this area. So that's what they're really looking at, is this location right here. I'm going to go back over to that article because this also talks about the IRI multi-model predictions favor La Niña to continue through December into January. And we do have climate models that can try to predict on not only if this is a La Niña, El Nino, or neutral situation, but also how significant, how strong will this La Niña be. So there we are, the observed September, because it takes it 3-month period. And we're now into the September, October, November 3-month period, about to go into the October, November, December 3-month period. And there's the forecast. So the black line is where is the observed. The models, they do spread quite a bit. You see how they're pretty much between, negative 0.2 to as low as negative 0.13 according to this situation. And then the green line is pretty much the consensus, I believe, or the trend. Okay, I don't think there is a trend here. It doesn't look like. Okay, yeah, statistical average and dynamic average. So it clearly shows we get below the negative 0.5 line for the 3-month period of October, November, December, all the way until most likely December, January, February, but then we climb out of that. And then we go into more of a neutral situation as we get into, looks like, spring. So with that said, now let's go back over to Max Perry. I have a new graphic here because we break the ENSO in different strengths. And you see here what's happening with La Niña. We call it a weak La Niña when it's negative 0.5 to negative 0.9 degrees, or degrees below average. Then it's a moderate between -1 to -1.4 degrees below average when we're looking at the sea surface temperatures in that part of the world, the equatorial Pacific. And then a strong situation, negative or -1.5 or lower. Same thing with El Nino. So when we go back over Storm Track 11 now, Perry, sorry I'm flipping and flopping on you. There's the graph, and you see here, most likely, this is going to be a weak La Niña situation. There's not a lot of lines that go past -1. So that tells us most likely this is going to be a weak La Niña. And what exactly does that mean? I'm going to get to that in just 1 second. Let me show you one more thing here. So this is the odds. I'm going to zoom out. The probabilities, and this again is from the Climate Prediction Center, on how everything's going to progress. So the blue bar is your probability of La Niña. The gray bar is your probability of a neutral, ENSO, and then El Nino is going to be the reddish orange bar. So it's very high confidence that La Niña will continue through the 3-month period, November, December, January, and then December, January, February. By February, we may start to see this thing go from a weak La Niña back over to a neutral situation. And that's what happened last spring. And of course, you know what happened last spring. We did have that severe weather outbreak across really northeast Arkansas. We stay in a neutral situation, looks like, through the summer, but then looks like going into next fall and next winter, we may be in an El Nino type situation. And they continue to update this every month. But overall, this has stayed consistent over the past few updates that, yes, La Nina is happening, but it's not going to be a strong La Nina compared to previous years that we've seen. And I'm going to show you that also with graphs of snow, and also when it comes to how low the temperature has been over past winters with the different type of ENSO situations. So when we break this down now on max, we're just going to focus on La Nina. We've had 25 years of La Nina since 1950. 8 of those were strong, 11 of those were a moderate La Nina, and 6 of those were a weak La Nina. And this is the situation that we are going into. So coming up here on WeatherWise, we're going to go into more specifics on what a La Nina could mean for us here in the natural state. Now we're just going to focus on data when it comes to La Nina here, pretty much for Little Rock. I can't focus on every city across Arkansas, but we're going to focus on what has been the records observed here in Little Rock when it comes to maybe the number of freezing nights for the period of November all the way through March, and also the lowest temperature we've seen during La Nina years. We're going to develop that for weak La Nina years and compare it to moderate La Nina years, because there is a significant difference from what I'm seeing. And then later we'll talk about the potential of severe weather. So right now, this is for weak La Nina, number of freezing nights, November through March, observed at Little Rock for the corresponding winter seasons here in Little Rock for the years that you see lined up. So 2016 to 2017, we only had 35 nights that temperatures dropped below freezing. But 2008 to 2009, we had 64. And then you see the 40s here for 2005, 2006, 2000 to 2001. But we're back up into the upper 60s, 1964 to 1965, and also 1954 to 1955, we had around 57 nights. Let's talk about the coldest temperatures observed according to the weak La Nina years. And once again, they're in the other direction, but it's those same winter seasons, 1954 to 1955, and also 1964 to 1965. Our coldest temperature recorded at Little Rock was 13 degrees. 2000, 2001, we dropped down to 10. 2005, 2006, it was 16. And then 2008 to 2009 is 13. 2016 to 2017, it was 12 degrees. And this goes from December to March for those temperatures. So the odds of us seeing temperatures for this winter season, since we have a weak La Nina in place, we'll see the numbers drop down into the low teens. It's pretty high, but there could only be maybe one night, 2 nights that we drop down to 16 or 17 degrees. It all depends on the Arctic oscillation, and if we have a big dip in the jet stream, that brings in that cold air. And there are some signs we're going to see that as we get into the end of November and going into the beginning of December. You may have seen it all over social media that we're going to see a chunk of Arctic air invade the country. The question is, how far south does it make it? Does it make its way all the way in Arkansas, or does it stay just off to our north and northeast? And you just have to stay tuned for that. But there is definitely some indications that we're going to see a big pattern shift here over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Let's talk about the lowest temperatures now for when it comes to a moderate La Nina. And it's a little bit of a different story. Now, we've had more years of a moderate La Nina, so there's more samples to look at. But you notice most of these winter seasons, temperatures were 11 degrees or lower. 11 degrees, 13 degrees, 14 degrees in the 70s. 0 was the lowest temperature, 1983, 1984. And then 1984 to 1985, so we have back-to-back years right there, we dropped down to 2 below 0. But then our lowest temperature in 2011, 2012 was 20 degrees. And then 2020 to 2021, it was 1 below 0. And we had a triple dip La Nina. And it was a triple dip moderate La Nina, in fact, for 2020 to 2021, 2021 to 2022, and 2022 to 2023. You see the variability right there because, yes, we had 1 below 0 for 2020 to 2021, and then 2 degrees for 2022 to 2023, but we only dropped down to 17 for that winter season of 2021 to 2022. So it just depends on if we had those huge dips in the jet stream that allow all that Arctic air to flood its way into the eastern half of the country. That's certainly the case for some years, but doesn't always happen. Let's talk about snow now. Now, this is a lot to look at, but I have basically broken down each winter season according to the ENSO, La Nina, neutral, and also El Nino. And of course, the one that stands out is going to be the 20 inches of 2020 to 2021. That's when we had that blizzard impact Central Arkansas. We were measuring snow not by inches, but by feet. But then the next year, it was a La Nina, it was a moderate La Nina, and we only had 6 inches of snow. And then the following year after that, we hardly had any snow. So your snow totals are all over the board. The highest for El Nino looks like it's going to be 2014 to 2015. And this is since 2000. This is not, of course, every year since 1950. That's just way too much to do. But you get an idea of how the snow really varies across Little Rock and probably across Central Arkansas. Just because it is a La Nina year does not guarantee that you're going to have a lot of snow. The odds may be a little bit higher, but you can never promise something like that. Now, with neutral years, in the purple, looks like the snow totals, we had 10 inches in 2012 to 2013. We had 6 inches around 2013 to 2014. But then 2019, 2020, I think we just had a trace, hardly anything. So now let's take a look at snow with La Nina in particular. Once again, there you see the 20 inches or over 20 inches really stands out for that moderate La Nina year of 2020 to 2021, but also they're all over the board. You've got 0.2 for 2008 to 2009, 0.2 for 2016 to 2017, and then a jump there 2010 to 2011 of 14.6 inches. Let's focus on now just weak La Nina snow. So with that, it does not look good if you take this and if we extrapolate this. This is a small sample size because we're only working with 6 winter seasons, but the trend shows usually when you have a weak La Nina, at least here in Little Rock, your snow total is not significant whatsoever. And this does not take into account what we had last year. Now, last year we had, it was a neutral year. It was supposed to be a weak La Nina year, but it was neutral. So that kind of rides the fence on exactly what happened because it was very close to being La Nina, but didn't quite make it. So that's why it's not on here, even though we were forecasting a La Nina year. But there's the trend. The one that stands out, 1964, 1965, that's 7.4. And then looking at snow for a moderate La Nina year, that's what I was talking about. That triple dip La Nina year from 2020 all the way through 2023, it's just all over the place. So looks like there's much more variability when it comes to a moderate La Nina year versus a weak La Nina year. Next up, let's talk about tornadoes when it comes to a La Nina season here in the natural state. That'll be coming up right after this. We talked about snow, we talked about cold. Now we're going to switch gears over to severe weather potential and in particularly tornado potential. You look at the stats, most active tornado years comparing La Nina to El Nino, and there's no question, La Nina years usually produce more tornadoes here in the natural state. 1999, of course, that was the Arkadelphia outbreak, the Interstate 30 outbreak, 107 tornadoes for that period. Now, it was a strong La Nina. That's key. 2008, also a strong La Nina year. That was when we had that EF4 roll its way through Stone County. Then we have 2011, 75 tornadoes recorded for that year, also strong. But even El Nino, you can't discount it. You can't say, oh, it's an El Nino year and we're not going to have a lot of tornadoes. You could say the odds favor a lower total, but you see right there, 78. Folks would certainly beg to differ back in 1982. So when we take a look at the number of tornadoes during a weak La Nina season, it's primarily in the 20s. This is a small sample size once again. 1954, 1955, we had 13. 1964, 1965, 22. But the one that really stands out is 2005 to 2006 with 63 tornadoes. And then 2016, 2017, we only had one tornado for that period, November to June. Now, it could have been much more active later that year once you got into the second severe weather season. But we're just looking at November to June with this graphic for the tornadoes in Arkansas. And on average per year, we usually see around 37. This year, we've already seen 60. And it was a La Nina, very close to a La Nina right at the beginning of the year, but then it went neutral. And that neutral phase probably impacted on how the storm tracks made their way across the state. Moderate La Nina years produce this effect. November to June, standout, 2005, 2006, with 72 tornadoes. Overall, looks like about 30 or so for that time period of November to June. And this doesn't tell you the strength either. So let's talk about the strength as the final thing, because when we break down the La Nina years compared to neutral and El Nino, EF3 or stronger tornadoes, and this is since 1980 that I've looked at this data. So 11 out of 15 of the La Nina years have produced EF3 or stronger tornadoes. So that's 73%. The neutral, it's 9 out of 19 years we've seen EF3 or stronger tornadoes. That's 47%. And El Nino, it's 6 out of 11 years or 54%. So you see the direction we're going in. La Nina, and this does verify when we look at the Climate Prediction Center forecast, usually does produce more severe weather across the Mid-South and also across the Deep South. It all depends on the strength of the La Nina, though. Looks like stronger La Ninas produce more significant outbreaks. So we're going into, of course, the second severe weather season, eventually primary severe weather season. We'll just see how things work out. But the timing and how everything works out in the atmosphere, where the jet stream set up, where these low pressure systems track, if we're on the northern side of the system, we get more winter weather. But if the system goes well to the north of us and brings in a lot of moisture from the Gulf and a lot of heat, that allows for the potential of severe weather to develop across the Mid-South going into December, January, February. So that's why you always want to go ahead and always have a plan to act when that time comes, when there is severe weather potential, and always continue to do your tornado safety precautions every single month so you don't forget when the time comes that you may need them. Thanks for joining me here on WeatherWise today. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Future episodes, we're going to continue to dive into more of the circulations happening across the world, such as the MJO that can also impact our weather pattern here into Arkansas, the Arctic Oscillation, and maybe some other oscillations. We'll just see how things go. But if you have an idea for me to talk about, go ahead and send me an email, nscott@thv11.com. or if you have any comments, you can also email me those comments, questions, and you can also reach out to me on my Facebook page. Until next time, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.